Warning. The following fanfic reading is for mature audiences only. It contains sexual innuendos and explicit language. Viewers' discretion is advised. Inside, the place is warm. Outside, it starts to pour. Written by ArgiePoo. Kokichi rocks back and forth a sliver anxiously, the wind whistling around him and sinking its teeth into his uncovered neck and ears. The last moments of the day are swiftly fading from sight, leaving everything shadowed and frostbitten. He grits his teeth and wrings his hands together in an effort to distract himself from the bite of the cold as he watches the scene before him with distress still dripping through the cracks of his haphazard facade. Their car had given out on the way home from what was supposed to be nothing more than an impulsive day trip, leaving them more or less stranded in the nearest roadside town unless they could manage to get it running again. And that was looking more and more like wishful thinking by the second. Rantaro digs his head out from under the hood and clicks his tongue softly, brushing away the smoke that follows him.
Well, I think I could get her running again, but I would need a minute and better lighting than this.
He gestures at the sky above with a sense of vexation, the dull light of the dusk casting long shadows across his face.
I hate to say it, but we might have to find a place to stay for tonight.
Kaede tucks a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a conflicted look on her face.
Well, I guess we don't really have a choice. I'll let the others know we won't be back until tomorrow.
She pulls her phone out of her pocket, unlocking it while humming under her breath. Kokichi snaps to reality at that, folding his arms and digging his fingers into his clothes.
Hey, I'm not staying in some rundown motel. Why can't we just steal some random car and hightail it out of here? I'm sure at least one of us knows how to hotwire an engine.
He trails off craftily, hoping no one hears the hint of desperation in the words. Kaito puts one hand on the back of his head, shoving him down playfully.
All right, how about we don't plan our own arrest? I happen to like my life as a free man. Even if a joyride is pretty tempting right about now.
He mutters that last bit under his breath, scratching his chin thoughtfully and looking away with an outstanding lack of subtlety. Kaede shoves her phone back in her pocket, glaring at them in a way that's mostly playful.
We're not stealing anything. Now let's look around. There's got to be somewhere we can stay around here.
She spins around in a slow circle, determined as ever in her search. Rantaro chuckles softly and strolls past her, gesturing over his shoulder.
Make sure you stay close so you don't get lost. This would be a bad place to wander off.
He goes a little vacant at that, getting a faraway look in his eye. Kaede perks up and skips after him with a slight rush in her step, grabbing his hand as she passes and swinging it back and forth. Rantaro gives her a soft smile, matching her bouncing stride with his lingering amble. They fall into a strange rhythm together, like the love-struck idiots they are. Kaito follows several feet behind, his eyes fixated on the streaked sky above him as though it shows the entire galaxy. Kokichi rolls his eyes as he watches them go, though something that he can't quite pinpoint tugs at the corners of his mind. It's shifting and elusive and impossible to describe other than to say it's a little soft around the edges. He doesn't quite know what to make of it, and so he brushes it to the side for now. Kaito stops on one foot and throws a look over his shoulder with a somewhat knitted look, and only then does he realize how far away the others have gotten when he's just been standing here watching them go.
Hey, you heard the man. Get a move on.
Kokichi shakes himself off with a hard blink for good measure, before giving an exaggerated roll of the eyes and dragging his feet down the road like a cat being pulled along by the leash.
All right, I'm coming. Shit, don't get your panties in a twist.
A sharp gust of wind whips around him, and all at once, he stumbles forward with a humiliating lack of grace as his feet cross over one another just slightly. Kaito stifles a chuckle as he catches up, leaning forwards as they walk so their eye levels match up, which is split evenly between extremely infuriating and vaguely endearing.
Hey, what's the matter? Don't tell me you're bothered by a little wind.
He's got an insufferably smug grin on his face, like he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's doing it on purpose. He's gotten better at playing along with their endless dance of back and forth, and though it's undeniably a positive development, it's also the worst thing to happen the past several weeks. Kokichi gives a melodramatic gasp, drawing out his words with a distinct cross between obvious sarcasm and dead seriousness.
What? No! What gives you that idea?
He gets a sudden flash of impulse that he follows through before he can question it, sprawling against him with an exaggerated stretch and pushing into him slightly. Kaito startles a little at the movement and eyes him up and down, though when he pushes him away, it's barely hard enough to move him at all.
I wonder. I can't quite put my finger on what gave it away.
He sighs under his breath slightly when he returns to his side, seemingly giving in on protesting and letting him do whatever he wants. Kokichi takes advantage of his compliance, pushing into him further and relishing in the almost unnatural warmth it provides.
Good. Because then I would start to worry that you were seeing things. I'm not cold at all. You're just projecting.
It's not technically a lie. He feels like he's standing in front of a fireplace right about now. Kaito stifles a chuckle, shaking his head with something that could resemble fondness if he were to be optimistic about it.
You're so weird, man. I swear, sometimes I think I'll never understand you.
He lifts his arm as he talks, as though making room for him under his wing. Kokichi short-circuits for a moment at the action, the tenderness of it taking him completely off guard. He doesn't recover for just a second too long, and when he does, he grabs for his clothes and instinctively sinks as far into the warmth as he can. That's when everything goes wrong, as in his haphazard motions, he trips sideways slightly and his feet drop out from under him entirely. Kaito is thrown off by the movement, stumbling forward for several steps as he reaches to regain control over his footing and never quite grabs hold of it. Kokichi latches onto his jacket with an undignified yelp and gets dragged along after him, sending the both of them hurling forwards in a swirl of uncontrolled panic.
What?
Kaede and Rantaro whirl around at the noise, reacting just fast enough to see them coming, but not quite fast enough to get out of the way. They crash with a cluster of disjointed shouts, stumbling down the street and trying desperately to keep from sprawling to the cracked pavement underneath them. They miss the ground by a thread several different times, still clinging to each other as they get a handle on themselves and slowly come to a stop. Rantaro glances between the rest of them as though checking to make sure they're all okay, before pinching the bridge of his nose and exhaling softly.
You know what? I'm not even going to ask.
Kokichi chuckles a little breathlessly, brushing his hair out of his eyes and giving his best impression of a sheepish expression.
Hey!
Kaito hits him lightly on the back of the head as he catches his breath, and he swings blindly in his general direction in retaliation. Kaede brushes herself off, then puts her hand on her hips with a huff.
I found what we were looking for, by the way.
She nods across the street, pointing at something over their heads. The rest of them glance over their shoulders in a synchronization that's almost amusing, then all made various noises of distaste at the sight they're met with.
Ugh.
The building is pretty much the first thing you see when you drive in, but it's visibly run down enough to completely neutralize whatever advantage the location might be able to give it. The windows are all dark and stained with age, and there's a neon sign hanging above the front door that looks like it's been burnt out for at least several years. Rantaro clicks his tongue, strolling towards it with a resigned drag in his step.
Well, I don't see any other options. Who knows? Maybe it'll be nicer on the inside.
He gestures vaguely, looking for all the world as though he doesn't believe his own words in the slightest. The rest of them glance at each other behind his back, silently debating among themselves for a moment before a gust of wind whips around them and pushes them through the doors, whether they like it or not. Kaito catches the bent handle of the door and holds it open for the two following after, then gives the sky one last mournful glance before slipping inside after them and letting the door jerk shut behind him. It's only the slightest bit warmer inside than it is outside, and the constant flickering of the electric lights above them gives the impression that they're going to go out without warning any moment now. There's an underlying rumble for what sounds like a broken heater, filling the room with a breeze that does more harm than good. Kokichi scowls, already looking like he would rather be anywhere else in the world right now.
Oh, this is already hell. Are you sure a joyride isn't an option?
He drags the words out and wrings his hands together, stalking around the room as though trying to find an escape. Kaito lingers by the door, shoving his hands in his pockets and staring nervously at the torn wallpaper on the walls.
I'm with you at this point. I think I saw a junkyard on the way here.
He says it lightheartedly, but the more he thinks about it, the less of a joke it becomes. Rantaro chuckles, strolling back from the front desk with 2 room keys in his hand.
Sorry, there's no refunds. You can file a complaint though, if you want. Yeah, I'm sure they would love to hear your feedback.
He twirls the keys around on his finger, smirking sarcastically. Kaede walks up behind him, grabbing his shoulders with both hands and resting her head in the crook of his neck as she hums curiously.
Why have you only got 2 keys? Are we doubling up?
Rantaro scratches the back of his head, sighing regretfully.
Yeah, it looks like it. They only take cash here, and someone blew all my money on souvenirs.
He stops twirling the keys and lets them hang off his finger, glaring between the rest of them with a playful sort of judgment. They all glance away sheepishly, and he chuckles slightly as he waves them off dismissively.
Anyways, I only had enough for 2 rooms.
The rest of them share a quick look at the words, but at the end of the day, it's not all that much of a conflict. It only takes a few seconds of thought to figure out who the ideal partners between them are. Kaito snatches one of the keys away from him, tossing it high in the air and catching it with one hand. He presses his fists together excitedly, looking sideways with a bright smile stretching across his face.
Kaede, how about it?
She's one of his best friends, and he knows he's closer with her than he is with anyone else in the room. It's only natural that they would partner up. Kokichi scrambles for the other key, straining his fingers in a futile effort to grab a hold of it.
Oh.
He whines pleadingly and pushes himself up onto the very tips of his toes, finally brushing against the key before it's jerked out of his reach yet again.
Rantaro, come on!
The two share this bond that everyone knows about, but no one really understands. It was clear they would partner up as well. They fall into halves without even really thinking about it. So the need for dispute is basically non-existent unless one of them has any other ideas. And there doesn't seem to be any reason why they would. Rantaro switches the key to his other hand, scratching the back of his neck and chuckling with a sheepishness that falls just short of genuine.
Sorry to throw a wrench in your plan.
He trails off as though waiting for a response to his unfinished words, glancing off to the side in a way that's more scheming than anything. Kaede picks up on whatever he's implying just a little too quickly, lacing her fingers together with a small smile.
Aw, that's a great idea. Hey, do you guys mind if we share a room instead?
The words are phrased like a question, but somehow she doesn't sound like she's going to stick around long enough to hear their answers.
But I mean, what?
Kokichi instantly lets out a strain of sputtered protests, gesturing wildly with a betrayed look on his face.
What? Hey! You can't just ditch us like that!
He makes another jump for the key, nearly knocking the both of them over in the process. Kaede grabs the key and pulls it away, her smile shifting into something just the slightest bit more sly.
Hey, it's only for one night. I'll give him back after that. Promise.
She giggles playfully, altogether looking like she's having far too much fun with this. Kaito swipes at the key from behind, glaring at her suspiciously when he just barely misses it.
What are you two planning? You've both got this look on your face.
He reluctantly gives up on the key after a few tries, lingering behind her and folding his arms instead. Rantaro chuckles with a barely concealed mischievousness, strolling off towards the elevator and grabbing the key himself as he passes.
I haven't a clue what you're talking about. Kaede, let's hurry up and find our room.
Kaede jogs after him, glancing back over her shoulder and waving at them with a smile that's just slightly too delighted as she leaves.
See you guys in the morning. Try not to murder each other overnight.
The elevator doors rumble unsteadily to a close before either of them can even think to object, leaving both of them standing in the lobby with what are most likely matching expressions of offended disbelief. Kokichi's the first of both of them to break the silence, glancing sideways with a false sense of idleness and a mischievous smirk tugging at the corners of his expression.
Hey, Kaito. You've still got the other key, haven't you?
Kaito pauses skeptically for a moment at the question, staring at him for a good few seconds, and then slowly checking his hand to make sure he actually does still have the key in question.
Yes? Why do you ask?
Kokichi lets a wicked grin spread across his face, then throws himself at him with an honestly frightening level of agility and latches onto his jacket like some kind of bipedal octopus. Kaito staggers under his weight and instinctively holds the hand with the key in it as far away from him as possible. They stumble along in a whirlwind of childish wrestling, scrabbling at each other mostly harmlessly, and not even realizing the path they're carving through the lobby until they crash together into the closed elevator door. Kaito blinks and trips back a step, Kokichi wasting no time taking advantage of his distraction to catch his wrist and pry his hand open with a slightly manic grin on his face.
All right, hand it over!
His nails are disturbingly sharp and long overdue for a trim, and they sting a little when they dig into his skin. It's like being attacked by a feral cat, or at least what he imagined being attacked by a feral cat would be like. Kaito tries to jerk his hand away, reaching around and clumsily pressing the elevator button with his other hand as he struggles.
Why do you even want it anyway? We're going to the same place! Let go!
He feels something dull and vaguely wet on his hand when he looks away for a moment, and he immediately wrenches it away and drops the key on the ground.
Hey! What the fuck was that for?
Kokichi giggles playfully, snatching the key up off of the ground and darting into the elevator as it opens.
Hey, what can I say? I won't apologize for being willing to go to extreme lengths to get what I want. It's a core character trait of mine, actually.
He twirls the key around on his finger before tossing it in the air and catching it in one hand with a cocky smirk. Kaito grumbles and stalks in after him, stepping on his foot as he passes.
Ow! You are the weirdest motherfucker I have ever met. I can't believe Kaede and Rantaro thought letting us sleep in the same room was in any way a good idea.
He folded his arms, leaning against the back wall as the door closes. The elevator is barely even big enough for the two of them, smelling almost overwhelmingly of burning dust and rattling like its tracks might give out if someone steps on the wrong floor tile. It's unreasonably loud as it goes, but somehow the silence is stifling enough that they can hear the static of the elevator music. Somehow, it's harder to talk in a place where there's nothing to talk about. It feels like several minutes have passed before it finally rumbles to a stop. Kokichi inhales dramatically when the doors open, stumbling through them and shaking himself off like a dog just out of a storm.
Phew! Let's not do that again. I think I was just about to pass out.
Kaito nudges him as he walks past, curling his fingers around the key still dangling from his hand and pulling it away as discreetly as possible.
I think I saw some stairs in the corner of the lobby. We can take those next time if you want.
Kokichi makes an interested noise as he brushes himself off, then pauses for a second before checking every one of his pockets with an increasing urgency. Eventually, his head snaps up and he gasps melodramatically.
Oh, you little thief! Get back here!
Kaito breaks into a run, cackling as he fumbles with the key in an effort to check the room number and somehow manages to avoid tripping over his own feet through blind luck. He swings around a corner with reckless abandon, skidding to a stop right in front of their door.
Oh! Ah!
Kokichi crashes into him and knocks him to the floor before he can even get the key in the lock, snatching it out of his hand and clumsily unlocking the door himself. Kaito scrambles to his feet and tumbles through it right on his heels, pulling it close behind him with a loud bang. It takes them a good few seconds to catch their breath, leaving the room silent except for the sound of it. Kaito slumps backwards against the door as it closes, brushing the air that is starting to wilt slightly from wear out of his eyes. Kokichi collapses against a rickety stool in the corner with a gasping breath, scrambling for balance when it rocks ominously under his weight. The room is fittingly run down for the place they're in, with torn wallpaper that's long since faded away lining the walls and a sharp draft nearly whistling in the air around them, the only furniture being the stool in the corner and 2 small beds pushed up against the wall. Kokichi gives a melodramatic gasp, bringing one hand to his face in mock scandalization.
2 beds? Oh, what a tragedy!
He throws himself sideways with an extravagant flourish, winking up at him flirtatiously when he's caught.
Now we'll have no excuse to share a night of reluctant emotional tension. This is criminal.
Kaito pushes him away as he rambles on, feeling his face starting to heat up against his will.
Hey, what do you mean by that? There's no emotional tension here at all. Reluctant or not.
The words come out without him thinking them through first, but his tongue ties itself in a knot before he can say anything else. Kokichi snickers, catching his balance with a twirl.
I don't know. You seem awfully tense to me.
He gives him a sly smirk out of the corner of his eye.
It's okay if you have a crush on me, you know. I mean, it's only natural you would.
Kaito takes what he hopes at least somewhat resembles a threatening step towards him, ignoring the way his face feels like it's being set on fire and his thoughts are swirling wildly.
I swear, if you don't shut your mouth right now, I'm going to...
Kokichi's smirk widens, and he tilts forward slightly on the balls of his feet.
You're going to what? Choke me? Grab me by the collar? Hit me against the wall, maybe? I mean, I'm always down for some homoerotic fighting. But if I'm being honest, the backdrop is a little lacking. I guess there's nothing we can do about that, though.
Kaito jerks back slightly, gritting his teeth as something he can't pin down swirls in the pit of his stomach.
All right, you little shit!
A crack of thunder cuts everything off, and their words stop at the sound. The sound of rain is quiet, but impossible to miss, hitting the ground outside with an uneven rhythm and stirring up the draft around their feet. It sends a shiver through the room, draining them of their fight. Kaito breaks the silence first, pinching the bridge of his nose and giving a long and drawn-out sigh.
Oh, this is just great. It's just one thing after another today, huh?
He can't help but flare slightly at the strain of bad luck they must have been cursed with in order for everything to line up like this. It would border on amusing if only it weren't cosmically frustrating.
Oh god, motherfucking damn it.
Kokichi curses under his breath as he stalks around the room, scuffing his feet on the worn carpet as he goes.
I swear, is someone up there out to get me? I've done nothing to deserve this. I've been a saint all my life. I swear. I shouldn't have to deal with any of this.
He grinds to a halt, shaking his fist at the ceiling as though cursing the weather itself. Kaito gives a weak chuckle at his antics, his hands dropping to his sides for a moment before he folds his arms so he can keep track of them.
It doesn't take much for you to turn into a melodramatic stage actor, does it? Relax. I'm sure you'll be fine.
Kokichi drapes himself over his back, gesturing dramatically.
I won't be fine. I can't sleep in the cold. I'll be kept awake all night, not getting even a wink of sleep.
He rests the back of his hand over his eyes, staring at him through his fingers.
You wouldn't want that, would you?
Kaito moves without thinking, tilting his head back and reaching over his shoulder so he can ruffle his hair with a chuckle that borders on fond.
No, I wouldn't.
It comes out far too sincere for the moment at hand, and for the life of him, he doesn't know why. Kaito goes still for a long moment, then snaps slightly as he ducks out from under the touch and brushes past him a little too quickly.
Whatever. Let's just get this over with.
There's something in his voice that sounds like a disguise, and it's almost a little comforting. Kaito sighs softly, feeling the energy drain out of him just from the words.
Yeah. Good night, Kokichi.
He hangs his layers on the bedpost and kicks his shoes off just under them, slumping down onto the hard mattress with a thump. The sheets are cold and dusty when he crawls under them, and the pillow is worn down with age. Kokichi shuffles around in his own bed rather loudly, finally settling down after a good several seconds of shifting.
Good night, Kaito.
He reaches over and yanks on the cord for the lamp on the nightstand with a force that plunges the room into darkness, then spends another several seconds getting back into the position he settled in before. Kaito listens to the sound of rain hitting the building outside and low thunder rolling in the distance as it mixes with the sound of constant rustling bedsheets, and against all odds, he feels his mind begin to drift away without him even forcing it to, as he slips into a somewhat half-hearted sleep. Kokichi rolls over for what must be the 1,000th time in the hour alone, digging his fingers into the sheets that do next to nothing to keep him warm, and screwing his eyes shut with a frustration that only grows more furious the longer it lingers. He somehow feels worse than he has all day, and the fact that he knew it would happen right from the start doesn't comfort him in the slightest, despite the fact that it should. A crack of lightning flashes through the wispy curtains and burns through his eyelids, and he blinks several times in a futile effort to brush it away. The storm hasn't slowed down the slightest in the several hours he's been trying to wrestle himself into sleep. It's only gotten stronger. Every sound blending together in an infuriating symphony that whistles in his ears. He hates everything about this. A steady snore echoes throughout the room, and he rolls over and glares bitterly at the vague silhouette resting several feet away from him with envy that he tries to disguise as irritation. The sound is so drowned out by everything else that it would almost be easier to ignore it, but he's desperate for a distraction, and he'll take what he can get. Kaito was out like a light from the moment he settled down, and by some unfathomable miracle, he hadn't stirred one bit since. It's this strange cross between bewildering and infuriating, with just the slightest hint of admirable, which is almost all he is at the end of the day. The thought comes disgustingly close to fondness, and he bats it away with clumsy hands, but it clings to him like a vine in the dark, so he settles for tearing his eyes away and rolling back over instead. He can feel exhaustion clawing at him in a futile effort to drag him down, and he knows the night is going to be a living hell, but nothing he does to force himself into sleep is working, and he knows that nothing will. There's too many things wrong. The way the storm rages outside with all the strength of a derailed freight train. The way the building groans under the weight of it like it might collapse any minute. The way the wind whips around him so hard that there might as well not be walls at all. It culminates in something far too overwhelming for him to push through. He grits his teeth and stifles a violent shiver, pulling the useless covers further around his shoulders and curling in on himself underneath them. The worst part of everything is how unbearably cold it is, pressing in on him from all sides and making it hard to think and impossible to sleep. He might as well just bury himself in the worn sheets and hide out until sunrise, because at this point, that's the only option he has. The steady snores echoed just the slightest bit louder, and all at once, he gets one of the worst ideas he's ever had. He bites it down as soon as he grabs hold of it, but it scurries from his hands and buries itself in the corners of his thoughts. Less of a genuine scheme and more of a reckless impulse that he can't seem to shake despite knowing it's nothing more than a meaningless instinct. He growls through his teeth, digging his fingers into the sheets as hard as he can and struggling to keep his skull empty. He can work out a sort of logic to it, and somehow that makes it worse. He doesn't want to justify the intrusive thoughts that always sneak up on him in the dark of the night, especially when he knows the justifications would go untrusted by anyone who heard them. He should just drop the whole thing in the mental fireplace. There's no reason to listen to anything his thoughts had to say. Not when they're delirious like they are now. Yet, at the same time, he knows he can only spiral through exhaustion for so long without making himself sick. He needs to sleep more than anything right now, and the key to doing so is staring him down with all the force of a cosmic entity, and the longer he ignores it, the stronger the tornado of emotion that swirls endlessly in his stomach grows. It's too thick to push down and too powerful to ignore. And there comes a time where he doesn't have any other option than to follow it through. He rolls off the bed without even telling himself to, just barely catching himself before he hits the floor.
Ooh!
And swinging himself upright with all the stability of a blade of grass in a tornado. The floor feels like ice on his bare feet, even with the worn carpet separating the two. And though it doesn't really get much colder, the wind bites harder without the slim protection of the covers. He almost clambers right back into his own bed, but something tells him he would never forgive himself if he did. So he crawls across the room with light steps, halting for several seconds every time the floor creaks under him, and gritting his teeth with every sharp draft that whips around him. It must take him several minutes to reach the other side of the room, but as soon as he does, his first instinct is to retreat back again. Kaito is sprawled out on his back in front of him, tangled in the sheets in a way that leaves most of his body exposed and yet somehow sound asleep nonetheless. Kokichi always had an evasive feeling that he was more wounded than he let on, but it's almost a little pitiful to note this might be the most relaxed he's ever seen him. Yet, there's something almost alluring about him, with all his defenses cast aside. He crushes that track before it wanders into places he doesn't want it, but the sentiment lingers. He doesn't move for several long seconds, torn between scrambling back into his own bed and forgetting this ever happened and burying himself in the warmth that rests before him, bright enough to burn. It's an endless cycle, where the longer he stands there, the more he wants to tear himself away, and the longer he stands there, the closer he shifts. He feels as though he's been pulled into an orbit, one that he's not sure he wants to break free of. His breath picks up slightly when his feet doesn't move as he tells them to, and all of a sudden, he feels the almost nostalgic rush he always gets when he's about to do something he knows he shouldn't. He reaches out with one hand despite his every better judgment, and the next thing he knows, he's holding the corner of the blanket and lifting it up slightly. There's no way he isn't going to regret this, but he's never had any semblance of impulse control before, and like hell he's going to start now. He locks that thought into the front of his mind as he lifts the blanket the rest of the way up and crawls underneath it. Holding his breath and digging his teeth into his tongue as the mattress gives just a little more than it should under his weight. He moves as though one wrong twitch will light the entire thing on fire, but he feels his control slipping as he rests himself down on the very edge of the bed and pulls the blanket back up to his neck. He doesn't even get the chance to settle down before a rush of warmth washes over him with a strength that borders on unnatural, and he feels the tension drain from his bones as he lets himself relax into it, while tactfully ignoring the source of his newfound comfort. The combination of sensations is almost overwhelming, and he struggles to gather himself enough to form a haphazard plan. He knows he won't have the strength to tear himself out of this, at least until the storm stops. He thinks he can get through this with both his pride and his extremities intact. There's no way he won't rustle himself awake at some point before the sun rises. He's never been able to wrangle his sleep routines into anything even resembling a structure. As long as he's back in his own bed before dawn hits, then no one will ever need to know he left in the first place. Something in the back of his mind warns him of how many ways this could go wrong, but the exhaustion is finally managing to drag him down, and he felt his eyes flutter shut on their own as his body slowly gives into sleep to the sound of steady snores. Just as he's about to drift off completely, there's a rustle from right next to him, and his eyes snap open so fast he hears several bones in his neck crack from the jerk.
This is Houston. We got a problem.
Kaito shifts clumsily and grumbles under his breath, somehow much closer than he was just a moment ago, and he feels his soul leave his body for a moment and only return when he realizes he hasn't woken up. And the universe vaults through the crack in his guard to kick him directly in the face. Kaito shifts a little bit harder than before, then all of a sudden throws his sleeping weight across the bed with a soft grumble that drags out slightly in the air.
Soft space. Zero gravity.
Kokichi doesn't screw his jaw shut in time to stop the noise that escapes him as he's pinned to the bed by a slack arm and the edge of a slowly breathing chest. He's thrown violently off guard by the rush of emotions that flood his nerves at the contact. Something almost unbearably warm spreads from the core of his chest and throughout all the nerves in his body, and he can't do anything other than lock every fiber of his being in place and hope for the best. It's the worst thing he's ever experienced and the best thing he'll ever experience, and his thoughts refuse to spin anything other than the same ear-splitting noise forever. Kaito stirs, murmuring something that almost manages to be coherent and rumbles deeply in his chest. Kokichi doesn't have time to react before he pulls him closer and buries his face in the crook of his neck, his movements disgustingly soft and weighted with sleep. It's repulsive and wonderful and wholeheartedly overwhelming all at the same time. Kokichi feels Kaito pressing up against every part of his body, the slow tide of his breath against the back of his neck, and the steady beat of his heart that sends vibrations all the way through his bones. The warmth is only stronger when it's pressing in on him on all sides, and it might almost be painful if he didn't find himself drawn to it like a moth to a flame. The rush of sensations borders on unbearable, and he never wants to leave. He doesn't think he could, even if he wanted to. Kaito has him pinned almost entirely to the bed, and nearly all of his weight is pressing down on him just from the way they're positioned. He might be able to work himself free if he put his mind to it, but it would take a good few minutes of struggling and leave far too much to chance of disturbing him. It just wouldn't be worth the risk, is all. He would be better off just staying put. As a tingling their limbs together as subtly as he can, and shuffles closer as his exhaustion finally manages to pull him down for good. And that's just another thing that nobody needs to know.
What? Morning already?
Kaito wakes up slowly and reluctantly, dragged from his dreams with a vague sense of exhaustion that somehow feels heavier than it did when he first went to sleep. It feels as though his brain hasn't connected with the rest of his body just yet, leaving him with nothing but his thoughts and a numb sensation in his fingertips. It takes a long second for his vision to focus, but once it does, he is almost instantly blinded by the cold sunlight streaming through the window on one side of the room. He narrows his eyes as soon as he registers it, bordering on a slow bewilderment. He hasn't woken up this long after sunrise since before he can remember, and even then, it was only ever when he stayed up late the night before. He lifts his head slightly to get a better look at the room, and only then does he look down and notice the weight in his arms that presses into his chest softly. Kokichi is sprawled out underneath him with a strange aura of grace to him, clinging to his shirt with slack hands and burying his face in his chest with something he might call tranquility if he didn't know any better. He is wearing an expression of pure, undisturbed sleep, his closed eyes fluttering as his head rolls back and his chest rising and falling just slightly with every slow breath he drags through his hanging mouth. Kaito jerks away on reflex, all of a sudden far more awake than he was before. Kokichi whines under his breath at the movement and tightens his grip on him imperceptibly, but other than that, he barely stirs. Kaito forces himself not to move any further, his breaths coming just the slightest bit too heavy and his thoughts running uneven circles around his head. He racks his brain for an explanation as to how they ended up in this position, but his thoughts get thrown off their tracks every time he looks down, and he can't keep his eyes away for long enough to figure out anything understandable. He searches the room, picking up bits and pieces, but never quite slotting them into place. The blankets at the empty bed next to his are strewn across the floor. The sunlight from the window is streaming through a layer of clouds, and there's a faint scent of rain that seeps through the walls. It's also startlingly quiet in a way that almost borders on peaceful, and the longer he sits in the silence, the more he begins to relax from his frantic state. It takes a moment for the panic to drain from his shoulders completely, but eventually he gives in and lowers himself back down to the bed slightly calmer than before. Kokichi twitches with a smile when he rested his head next to his on the pillow, and after a moment of debate, he slowly reaches one arm over his body and sets a hand on his back. A chuckle builds in his throat, slipping out without him really meaning it to, and a rush of fondness runs through him and settles in the far corners of his body. The feeling of it cracking in his bones would border on unsettling if he were to let himself think about it for too long.
Cut it out, Kaito. I don't want this food.
Kokichi gives a drawn-out grumble under his breath and stirs distinctly in his arms. Then all of a sudden cracks away like a whip and tumbles right to the floor in an effort to scramble away. He scurries to his feet frantically, whirling on him with a look of panicked bewilderment in his eye.
What the fuck? What the hell are you doing in my bed?
Kaito feels a slight twinge at the loss of contact and reaches after him with a strange longing that he kicks to the side once he spots it sneaking up on him, before jerking his hand away as his thoughts are replaced with confusion and everything else is left by the wayside in the process.
What? I wasn't in your bed. You were in mine.
Kokichi halts short at his words, staring at him vacantly for several long seconds before slowly turning over his shoulder to look towards the empty bed behind him. He stays dead silent long enough to pass being amusing and start being a little worrisome, before clicking his tongue and dragging a long breath in and out through his teeth. Kaito struggles not to crumble into laughter at the sight of it, only barely managing to wrangle himself.
Shit, if you really wanted to cuddle that badly, you could have just asked. You didn't have to sneak around about it.
He is only teasing, yet the words border on genuine where they sit on his tongue, and he's not sure how he feels about that. Kokichi whips around towards him, baring his teeth in a way that falls short of threatening and winds up a little frantic.
I was cold, okay? What did you want me to do?
He blushes all the way to the tips of his ears, tripping over his own words despite the confrontational shading of his voice. Kaito stifles a giggle behind his hand, holding his hands up in mock surrender.
No, I get it. I have a very comforting presence. I know.
He doesn't think about the implications of his own words too hard, not wanting to wind up flustering himself. Kokichi seethes, looking all of 2 seconds away from strangling him on the spot.
Shut up! I didn't mean it like that!
He hisses out a breath and tosses his hair slightly, visibly dragging himself back down.
I barely got any sleep anyways. You were snoring so loudly I could barely hear myself think. And you rolled over me at least twice. You should be ashamed of yourself for being such a lousy bedmate.
He checks his nails with one of his usual apathetic smiles on his face, though there's something just slightly off-kilter about it. Kaito can't help but be a little insulted despite everything, but is overwhelmed by a sense of mischievousness that slowly crawls across his face and draws his expression into a plotting twinkle.
Oh yeah? We'll see about that.
Kokichi gives him a sideways look, his eyebrows knitted with suspicion as his sentence starts in the back of his throat. Kaito cuts him off before he can say a word, launching himself at him as hard as he can and grabbing him by the front of the shirt in order to drag him down to the bed.
Get over here, you little shit!
Kokichi lets out a squeal that borders on a shriek as he's thrown around, thrashing wildly as he goes like he's trying to claw himself free. Kaito just barely manages to dodge his kicking feet, trying to grab hold of him without being hit in the face and not doing the best job at it. Kokichi gives a somewhat breathless giggle, his scrambling growing a little more half-hearted with time.
Hey, let me go!
Kaito cackles brightly, struggling to keep his composure as he grabs blindly at whatever limb happens to fly past him.
This is what you get!
Kokichi throws both hands at him in a lackluster illusion of a punch and misses by a mile, and he seizes the opportunity to grab him by the wrists and pin him to the bed with his own weight.
Huh, I've got you now!
Kokichi wheezes, shoving him lightheartedly and laughing under his breath.
Get the hell off me! I can't breathe!
He gives a look like he's trying to glare, but it just winds up looking more like a smile. Kaito leans further out of spite, not even bothering to stifle his snickers.
Yeah, sure you can't.
He knows his smirk is more fond than he would rather it be, but he can't bring himself to pull it back down. They glare playfully at each other for a long moment before dissolving into laughter completely and collapsing onto each other in the process. There's a sense of unspoken happiness hanging in the air around them, like they've both silently agreed that this is good, even if neither of them can bring themselves to say it out loud. It's less of a creation and more of a discovery of something that was always there. Kokichi blinks suddenly, then gets an insufferably smug look on his face that spells nothing good.
So, you still think there's no emotional tension between us? Seriously, you gotta face the truth at some point.
And just like that, the moment snaps away like mist in the sun.
What?
Kaito jerks back just slightly with a flustered noise, instinctively throwing something that falls short of a strike in his general direction and missing by a hair.
Would you shut up about that already? It's not funny!
Kokichi doesn't hesitate for a moment, darting out from under him before he even realizes he's gone and twirling around towards him once he's on the other side of the room.
On the contrary, I happen to think it's hilarious. Especially when you get so worked up about it.
He winks slyly and gives a casual salute as he ducks behind the door, grabbing the room keys on his way out.
Catch me if you can, Starshine.
Kaito scrambles off the bed to run after him, snatching his jacket off the bedpost and catching the door before it closes all the way.
Hey, get back here!
He forces one arm through the sleeve of his jacket as he stumbles out of the room and kicks the door shut behind him, struggling with the clothing for a solid few seconds before finally managing to get everything into place and chasing him down the hallway. Rantaro stands in the deserted lobby of the motel, one hand buried in his pocket and the other one thumbing anxiously at his phone without absorbing anything displayed on the screen. He eventually clicks it off with a sigh, gnawing at his bottom lip with a nervous sort of frustration.
Damn it, where the hell are they?
Kaede hums absent-mindedly, drumming her fingers on the back of her hands and glancing periodically around the room as she subtly drifts closely to him. Maybe they both slept in? Her voice has a steady tone to it, and even though he's not completely reassured by her words, it's grounding nonetheless. Rantaro grumbles under his breath, pulling his hand out of his pocket so he can wrap his arm around her shoulders and bring her close.
I've never known either of them to sleep in. Insomniacs, both of them.
He smirks fondly, knowing exactly how hypocritical he's being. He would be lying through his teeth if he said he had any semblance of a healthy sleep schedule. Kaede giggles, covering her mouth with her hand and resting her head on his shoulder. Maybe they really did steal a car and run with it. I can picture them climbing out their window with their bedsheets all tied together like those kids in the movies and bickering in the rain over which junkyard wreck they should hotwire. Rantaro chuckles at the mental image, but before he could say anything, he's cut off by the sound of footsteps strumming down the stairs, hidden behind a broken vending machine in the far corner of the room that none of them had seen on their way in. Kokichi comes tumbling out of the stairwell like there's fire on his heels, and collides with the vending machine so hard it sways slightly from the impact before hesitantly settling again several seconds later, only for him to slump against it far too haphazardly as he steadies himself with heavy breaths. Kaito tumbles out after him a second later, with a look of feral pursuit on his face, his eyes snapping with realization just a second too late to stop himself from crashing into the vending machine as well. Time seems to slow as the towering weight tilts just the slightest bit too far to one side, several different desperate screams mixing together helplessly as it pitches downwards and smashes against the floor with an explosive noise. The walls shake slightly from the impact, and the lights above them seem to ominously flicker just a little bit harder for a moment before returning to their unsteady buzz. All of them are silent for too many seconds to count, staring at the vending machine where it lays with its contents strewn across the carpet. Kaede digs the heels of her palms into her eyes and takes a deep breath, trying to compose herself. Rantaro pinches the bridge of his nose and grits his teeth in an effort to do the same. Kaito and Kokichi glance sideways at each other. Both of them still sprawled out on the floor, then point at each other in perfect synchronization.
It was his fault.
Kaede walks over to them, her exasperation slowly but surely shifting into a sort of fondness. Why were you guys chasing each other around like maniacs first thing in the morning anyways? Kokichi snickers deviously, putting his hands on his hips with a teasing smirk on his face.
Yeah. Why don't you tell them why you were chasing me around? I bet they would find it hilarious.
He drags out the last word with what almost looks like a flirtatious look in his eye, rocking back and forth on his heels slightly as he talks. Kaito rolls his eyes, folding his arms over his chest and glaring with no real heat behind it.
Hey, don't act like it wasn't your fault. You can't pin this one on me.
There's a hint of something almost teasing in his voice, but it's subtle and easy enough to miss without listening for it that it might as just well not be there. Rantaro bites back a snicker and puts both thumbs in his pockets, giving a knowing smirk.
Well, spare us the details.
He winks with an overplayed lack of subtlety, making sure his implication gets across. He doesn't actually think that's what happened, obviously, but there's never any harm in a little playful teasing. He gets exactly the reaction he's looking for. The two of them scramble a few feet away from each other, their flustered protests mixing together as they avert their eyes to the wall and floor in a way that's almost comically noticeable. He lets them go on for as long as he can before he breaks out in a cackle, holding his hands up in mock surrender.
All right, I was joking. No need to have a fit over it.
Kokichi recovers quickly, sticking his tongue out and stepping on his foot as he walks past.
I knew that. It's just that you shouldn't joke about something so revolting, you know?
He smirks over his shoulder and gestures after himself, as though beckoning a dog. His teasing expression neutralized a little by the slight color to his ears. Kaito looks like he wants to respond to that somehow, then thinks better of it at the last second and instead follows with his hands in his pockets and a grumble on the tip of his tongue.
Well, you don't need to be an asshole about it.
His bitterness isn't convincing in the slightest, especially not with the way he nearly steps on the backs of his shoes several times as he walks. Rantaro and Kaede share a look that's shamelessly amused on one end and fondly exasperated on the other, before locking their fingers together and following them outside.
Where are my glasses at? My glasses! I can't voice act without my glasses. Oh, there they are.
It doesn't take much for you to turn into a melodramatic... Melodramatic? Yeah.
My god, melon? Melon dramatic?
Yeah, I know. Melon. Anyway, try again. That's good. That's probably definitely going on the blooper wheel. Oh, reel, sorry, not wheel. Hey, I'm not staying in some rundown motel! Why can't we just steal some random car and hightail it out of here? I'm sure at least one of us has... Damn it. I know. Trying to do it, you know, it's kinda desperate and fast. Oh well, going on the bloop. Good night, Kokichi. Oh. What are you talking about? I'm Kokichi. Ooh. It's like squeezing all the air out of my lungs. Catch me if you can, Kaito boy. That was too good to pass up. Alrighty. Well, I guess now that recording's over, I'd say finish recording, so this is Raptamon132 signing out. And if you don't mind, I think I just Kokichi the fucking shit out of this.
Hey everyone, Agent Fluffy here, and thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. If you want to support me even more, feel free to support my Patreon. The links are right here.